Now we'd like to have a discussion about food and agriculture.
We're going to begin the discussion talking about something called GMO, genetically modified organisms, or genetically modified food. And there's been a lot of talk that genetically modified foods are good for you. They talk about how they're more pest resistant, how they can grow more food, how they can be superfoods that make you healthier. Let me explain to you another side of all this. There's a whole bunch of farmers and medical companies that totally disagree with this, and you're not going to hear it on CNN. I'm sorry. But it's been shown over and over in research studies that actually GMO crops do not produce a higher yield of food. They don't. In fact, they produce a lower yield of food. They don't give as much. That's the first problem. Second problem is you look at the chemicals that are sprayed on GMOs. They're sprayed with what's called Roundup spray, which is a pesticide, insecticide. Now that's not good to begin with. You don't want that on your food, okay? You don't want that in your food. You don't want that in your soil. You don't want that in your crops, period. Anyway, what happens is the insects come on the food, and guess what happens? Yeah, at first they're affected, but then they start to adapt to the food.
They become resistant.
Right. And guess what? You have to use more chemicals on the food in order to keep the food growing. That makes it even worse. So GMO products have their problems. And also they call it a superfood. Problem is, if you actually do research studies on GMO, you'll find the nutritional content of GMOs are not as good as, say, natural or organic food. They're not. There's a bunch of research studies out there by different medical companies, doctors, nutritionists, and they say, no, sorry, GMOs will not give you a higher nutritional content. In fact, in India, there was a bunch of farmers that committed suicide because the whole GMO crop was just turning bottom up, and it was destroying their lives. It was a fraud. I'm sorry, but a lot of what you're reading about GMOs, it's not true.
So let me get this straight. Are you saying that in terms of yields, how much food the farmer gets out of each crop, you're saying that GMOs actually produce less food,
you got it,
edible food, than organic crops? And in terms of nutritional content, are you saying that GMO foods actually have lower nutritional value?
Yes. And getting to that point, there's two camps. One camp says conventional food, non-organic, and organic nutritional content is about the same. And these include studies done by the British Nutritional Foundation, the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, and a big study done by Stanford. But the problem with this big, huge Stanford study, which all the newspapers brought out, was that there was a conflict of interest. The major researcher, and her name is Ingram Olkin, O-L-K-I-N, worked for the tobacco company. Cigarettes, tobacco use a lot of chemicals. So does GMO. See the link? There's money involved, big time. So the whole study is in conflict. There's a couple of other people, and I'm going to tell you a couple. There's another camp. For example, the Center for Science in the Public Interest. There was that's one. A second one, there was a $25 million European Union funded study done. And number three, there was a study done in the British Journal of Nutrition. 343 peer-reviewed journals, research studies. All of them found organic food had from a moderate to significant increase of nutritional content. Okay, we're talking big research studies here, a lot of research studies, a lot of money to find out if organic food really does have more nutritional content. So you've got two major camps going on here that are totally opposed to each other.
Well, it seems to me what you're saying is that you're getting better yields out of organic crops, and you're getting higher nutritional value out of organic
Absolutely.
crops. So the people are definitely benefiting from organic crops. So who's benefiting from the GMOs?
Yeah, the big companies, pharmaceutical companies, biotech companies, they're getting the money. That's who's getting it. We're not getting it. The hospitals, the companies that make the drugs, the chemical companies, they're making a lot of money.
So when they're making the
Chemicals.
drugs, they're making the drugs to put on the food, the pesticides to put on the food,
Right.
and if people get sick, then their pharmaceutical companies are selling them the drugs to help them get better.
Yeah.
So they make money on the drugs and the pesticides.
I wonder does the word Roundup, I wonder if that's
Perhaps
significant?
that's where it comes from.
Maybe.
Roundup. First, you
interesting.
cover people's foods in pesticides, people get sick, cancer, and they need to go to the hospital to buy drugs from big pharmaceutical companies, the same companies that are owned by the big
Yeah.
pesticide companies,
Yeah.
and it goes around and around,
Yeah.
up and up,
Right.
round up, round up.
And that's
Could
exactly
be.
how it works. That's exactly
That's
how
a
it works.
fascinating hypothesis.
Yep. So, that's our discussion today on agriculture and food. You might want to do some research by yourself to find out what's going into your body. And now we have 2 questions based on these conversations. And Thomas, do you have a question?
Sure. My question is, when you're not sure about what you're eating, what's in the food you're eating, what's the best way to find out what's in the food you're eating?
And the second question is, I mentioned 3 things about GMO foods that they claimed make it superior, but then I refuted that. What were the 3 things I mentioned that they said that made GMO superior?